Well, welcome everybody to today's speaker series. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Igor Grossmann for his presentation, World After COVID, Behavioral and Social Science Forecasting Collaborative. Before we get going, I'm going to let you know a little bit about the format that we use here. So it will be a 20-minute presentation followed by 10 minutes for questions for Dr. Grossmann. In that vein, if you do have a question that you'd like to pose throughout his talk, we will have those questions and we will pose them to Dr. Grossmann at the very end. If you'd also like to speak to Dr. Grossmann directly during that 10-minute question session, feel free to turn on your camera and your mic back on, and you can speak with Igor directly. For now, while Igor is presenting, please turn off your mic and your camera. And without further ado, World After COVID. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for having me on this wonderful speaker series. I've been a fan of CanCOVID, and it's a privilege and a pleasure to meet with all of you guys. So what I would like to talk about is not necessarily the insights about what the world will look like, but rather some potential opportunities and call for action for scientists. And the reason why I cannot really tell you what the world will look like is because forecasting is hard. And unless you're Harry Seldon from the Foundation series in Isaac Asimov's novel series, you will probably not be able to do it accurately. But the key thing why I think forecasting and thinking about what the future will look like is really important these days is because, first of all, for scientists, prediction is one of the key hallmarks actually, of evaluating the accuracy of our models. It allows us to test our theories, in my case, in behavioral and social sciences, but of course that applies more broadly, against real data. It also allows us to develop some kind of skepticism and humility about our own enterprise and possibly improve our theoretical understanding. And on a practical note, of course, when end of March, April happened, many people have been wondering, including myself, what the world after COVID-19 will look like. And what should we prepare ourselves for? And what can we do to possibly work towards the positive versions of the future and prevent the negative versions of the future? And I specifically talk about the psychological and social changes that are going ahead. I mean, we probably are all caring about the health-related issues, obviously. We also care about the economic issues, but there's also something in between these two. And that's what I'm mostly interested in. The spread of misinformation, the distrust in other people and government, social distancing implications, mental health. Those are the domains that I'm, as a social scientist, want to explore. And so the question that I'm really interested in is, what do you think scientists would think about the societal changes in the month to come? And how accurate are these forecasts? And this is the question that I became really interested in right when the pandemic happened. To some extent, I have been studying the societal changes for a little bit before that, using modeling approaches in psychology, but also just trying to trace how our society in North America and Canada, in the United States, but also in other parts of the world, has been evolving over the last few decades, over the last 100 years. But I've also been interested in the topic of accuracy and sort of, to some extent, wisdom. Can we actually be accurate in predicting how we'll feel, how we'll think, what may happen? And so when the pandemic happened, I somehow decided to fuse those two together. And that's the set of projects that then emerged from it. So we have, I put in a team together, and it's Growing International Collaborative, or Forecasting Collaborative, where we have assessed forecasts of academics from behavioral and social sciences, but also from other disciplines, political sciences and so on, in April and in May. We have also been doing retrospective assessments about societal change just this last month. How much do academics and lay people think the world has changed in the last half a year? So it allows us to do some comparisons. But the key thing that I would like to talk about today is the forecasting tournament, where we are right in the phase 2 right now. And I encourage more people, more scientists to join, as well as a project that I will briefly touch on at the end, which is sort of like a video documentary, a living history document about how world's leading scientists have been thinking about the world after COVID and what do they think about what we need to make it a better place. So hopefully I'll be able to touch a little bit on that at the very end. So for the forecasting collaborative, I have a number of people that I brought on board from various parts of the world. The chief group here is from the United States and from Canada. Some people who know anything about forecasting probably heard of Phil Tetlock. He's a stand name in this sort of area. And my colleague, Michael Varnum, is another person who I've been working on quite a bit on tracing societal changes in the past. So the key questions here are, what do scientists think? How accurate are their forecasts? How do different scientific approaches vary in types of forecasts people make? And what about the accuracy? For instance, there are approaches, and this applies both for modeling COVID as well as for modeling social issues that are just data-driven, pure number crunching using different machine learning approaches or using agent-based modeling or some kind of a combination. There's also theoretical approaches. In psychology, we have all sorts of theories about what would lead to decline in mental health or rise in prejudice or political polarization. Or there's a hybrid set of approaches where you try to use some theoretical base rates or focus on some conditional variables. And depends on those conditional variables, you may be predicting one thing or another. What is unique in this type of forecasting collaborative is that we really wanted to look at the wide range of perspectives, bringing people from sciences, from the intelligence community, as well as just a comparison of lay people who have been involved in this. And so here is the sort of outline of our stages for the tournament. We started in June, end of May, early June, where we provided data. And this was very important for us to get actual data so that those people who are engaged in modeling would be able to capitalize and develop models based on prior monthly data for up to 10 domains. And then they submitted their forecasts along with some demographic information. And now we're in stage 2. We just opened our second phase of the tournament, where we invite more people to join us and also provide those who participated earlier an opportunity to update their forecasts. So in some ways, in case you're familiar with the term Bayesian updating, this is exactly what we are doing. We're trying to give people an opportunity to update their estimates, tell them also if they were right or wrong, because we give them 6 more months of new data and say, oh, yeah, you predicted this line, but this is what actually happened. And we hope to complete in May of this coming year, so exactly a year after. And the beauty is that we will be able to also evaluate right away the accuracy and see what approaches are better or worse. We have a range of different domains that we decided to focus on. I wish I could have focused on even greater number, but unfortunately, we are restricted by some very simple things. Number one, availability of data. Unfortunately, good data, as many of you know, is very hard to come by, especially at good temporal resolution. And by good temporal resolution, I mean, we want at least monthly estimates, even though, of course, some of the changes that we are talking about are probably much more rapid than that. And that would be outside of the purview of this tournament. Fortunately, for at least some domain, we were able to find some decent data, including well-being, life satisfaction, affect, a political polarization, ideological preferences, and various forms of bias and prejudice towards racial groups. And the reason we focus on the United States here is because, and not on Canada, which I wished we could have done, is because United States provides more data on that temporal resolution. We wanted to have at least 3 years of prior data, whereas Canada often, well, we have some data, but not as good in terms of the temporal resolution. Hopefully it will change after the pandemic. A little bit about the estimates. So for instance, for affective well-being and use Twitter data. And the reason was because Gallup, which is one of the main providers of well-being data in the world, decided to stop collecting their surveys, which they have done via polls, national polls, until about half of the year in 2019, and then they stopped. And now, of course, they resumed, but there was a gap and we couldn't use their estimates because of that. Fortunately, the Twitter-based estimates that use an approximation using the largest amount of Twitter data available today very closely follow the national polls in the United States. So this is as good as it gets. So we look at the Kendall ladder of life satisfaction. We also used here, by the way, the affective well-being scores, affective sentiment from Twitter as well, for positive and negative affect. For politics, we focused on ideological preferences in the United States, of course, very contentious and interesting topic for those of you who are following the news in the United States with the political polarization on the rise, especially during the time of the national election. And so here we could get national polls, generic ballot polls conducted by various private and not private companies. We also looked at the political polarization, approval ratings by party identification, which has been collected by Gallup consistently. And at the end, we also included the measures of implicit and explicit bias. And this is not representative survey, but we tried to approximate it using some weighting procedures for bias towards or against African Americans, bias towards and again Asian Americans, and also gender and career bias. Do you associate certain careers more with men or with women? And the reason why we focus on these domains along with the politics and well-being is because explicitly for this, for prejudice and bias, there's a number of psychological and ecological theories which suggest that in the time of the pandemic, people may be becoming more tradition oriented and more prejudiced against minorities. And now there's a question, is that really the pathogens that somehow make you focus more on your in-group and dislike the out-group and follow more traditional gender norms? Or is it the economic consequences? So maybe it's something entirely different. And so one of the beauties of this naturalistic experiment that we unfortunately are living through right now is that the scientists were able to possibly tease it apart and examine both the economic and pathogen-related factors in predicting and evaluating the trajectory of how people change in their attitudes. So a little bit about what we have already. We have over 86 teams that provided 360 plus predictions. Teams vary in size from a single person to 7 members. And most of them are, at least half of them are coming from North America, United States and Canada. But there are also many people from Europe, and we also try to recruit more people from Oceania as well as the Asia, South and East Asia. And so far we have mostly psychologists, because I'm a psychologist, they probably follow me more than some other fields, but also a lot of people from computer science and economics. And I hope we can also get more people from epidemiology and medical fields. So generally, people who participate can take any approaches. They can use their intuition, for instance. They can just use their theory, or they can do a data-driven approach for providing estimates. And as well as a combination of these, we don't really restrict it. What we're interested in is how people choose and which of the approaches is more accurate. What is the reasoning behind their modeling approaches of the forecasts? And generally, apologies for this kind of jumping, participants can be scientists, or can also be graduate students. So if you have graduate students who may be interested in this, please forward them this information. Forecasters, we have a number of forecasters from the intelligence community from North America and from Europe. And we want to provide this also as an opportunity for people to sharpen insights and their intuitions. It's really like a tool to sharpen your scientific reasoning. And as a plus point is anybody who participates, because you'll be basically developing models, qualifies for authorship on a paper, which we aim for one of the top journals that you can think of. So we open right now for phase 2 of the tournament. Our deadline is December 7th, and you can actually see, if you go to the predictions.uwaterloo.ca, much more information about this, including several instructional YouTube videos and all the data that you need in order to participate. In case you're stuck, in case you're interested in how to do this, but you don't know, please don't be shy, send me an email, or you can also raise a question in this talk series. So one other thing at the end that I would like to highlight is the related project. I already mentioned that I've also been fascinated by the possibility of interviewing academics. And specifically, this page is not live yet. It will go live on December 15th, hopefully a little bit before that. Around the time when COVID hit us all very hard, I was trying to figure out, what did people think about the time of the Spanish flu? What did scientists think about that time? And I couldn't find much information. And so I decided to create some kind of like a documentary where I started a set of interviews with the world's leading academics, specifically in social behavioral sciences. And I was able to continue that since June, and continued all the way until this week, where we got over top 50 academics from around the world, including present and past presidents of the Association for Psychological Science, American Psychological Association, Association for Research in Personality and Social Psychology. It's really luminaries, and not just from North America, but also from Hong Kong, from Korea, from Japan, from Australia, and so on. So the page will go live. It will have both interviews and visualizations. For instance, this is just like a little snippet. What are the type of negative consequences that people are thinking about? Well, one of the first things that people are mentioning is estrangement and alienation, but they also mention prejudice, political conflict, mistrust, and social inequality, as well as a lot of people are mentioning authoritarianism and erosion of democratic institutions. So like, of course, those require different strategies for mitigation. And what we also do, what we will do on this website, is try to visualize how the different themes for different things are interrelated, as well as showcase, for instance, here's what kind of wisdom we need, according to the academics, to prevent the negative consequences and sustain positive things. For instance, for negative consequences, people are talking about greater political engagement and try to introduce some kind of structural changes in the society to prevent rising inequality, or understanding of some kind of a shared humanity, that we're not like just insular nations that are fighting for the vaccine, but we're all in this together. Or focus on the long term instead of really thinking about the here and now, which can be, as psychologists know, quite maladaptive, especially in the current context. So as I mentioned, this page will go live, worldaftercovid.info. It's a little side project that I've been doing. And I hope a lot of you would be interested in visiting that, and it will be useful for you and for the community at large. And that's all I have to say. I think we are right on time, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grossmann. If there are any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box now, or you can ask Dr. Grossmann right now. I have a very simple question. The videos that you're putting together for World After COVID, is that also going to be available on YouTube or any other platforms like that?
Yes, so the web portal that we are developing will have an integration with YouTube, and sort of like there will also be with chapters, because there are 5 questions that each person answers in a structured format. Yes, all of that will be available. It's shareable. I also use it, and transcripts also available as some kind of a living history document database for others to peruse and do whatever you want with it. Hopefully it will be of use to people. I feel it just fills the gap. It's almost like an asynchronous conference among the world social scientists on the future after COVID, but also it's a document about what did people think about the future in this moment. I find that sometimes thinking about the future is the best way to understand the words of the present. And yes, so it will all be available.
Fantastic. Any other questions? Give a little bit of time. All right.
Sorry.
Oh, there we go.
Susan here. Sorry,
Hi,
I was
Susan.
trying to turn my video on, but I think it's disabled. That's okay. Thank you so much, and I'm terribly sorry I was a bit late. Had internet problems in the the current world. I can't seem to get into the future at all. But just can you talk a little bit about your audiences for this work? Like how do you see this applying in policy, politics, practice, and the rest?
Right. So the forecasting collaborative, the evaluation of accuracy, of course, that's largely an academic project, except that we can certainly make recommendations about what are sort of average estimates for mental health trajectories, in the same way how modeling experts right now do projections for different possibilities of the COVID trajectory itself. So after the second phase is in, I'm happy to provide those estimates if needed for mental health. Now, keep in mind that those are focusing on the United States in particular. So maybe they're not super useful for Canada, but they may be of some relevance, at least maybe for American policymakers. The world after COVID, I envision as a document that would be able to shift the focus from purely economic and health-related considerations to the social realm. I think we see quite a bit of movement that direction with mistrust and misinformation, but I think there is much more that can be done. And I do hope that we can find a way to reach the policymakers, and that we can also reach the general audience. So any advice or any suggestions or ways to sort of like push those ideas forward would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much. Susan Law here, and I guess I wonder if that could be one of the discussions you have with any new collaborators that come in from this network. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I have a question here from Anne Christie. She says, do you have to have an academic affiliation to take part?
In the Forecast Collaborative, no. It can be anybody. In fact, as my friend and colleague Phil Tatlock found out in some of his work on super forecasters, as he calls them, people who do better than some of the members of the intelligence community in forecasting geopolitical events, happen to be often non-experts. In fact, they're non-dogmatic, and they're able to apply different strategies and do better in forecasting those events than experts. So yes, you can definitely participate.
Fantastic. Okay. I think that's everybody in terms of questions. Well, thank you so much, Igor. I so enjoyed that. I think our audience did too. I found it fascinating. And I hope that we can hear more from you and the forecasting that you and your collective puts together in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. And please keep in touch in case you have any questions, anything else about the tournament, predictions.uwaterloo.ca. or otherwise the worldaftercovid.info will go live in December, hopefully December 10th, but definitely by December 15th.
Fantastic. All right, thanks everybody. We'll see you next
Thanks.
time.